I didn't think anything could unsettle the rhythm of my life the way it did that summer. On the surface, everything looked stable. I was married, comfortable, routine-bound, the kind of woman people described as dependable. My husband trusted me completely, and I wore that trust like a badge of honor. We had built a quiet life, one that didn't invite questions. But quiet doesn't mean untouched. Sometimes it just means untested. That he had always been around. A familiar presence, never intrusive, always respectful. A family friend, someone who had known us for years, who came and went during gatherings, holidays, casual evenings. I had watched him grow into himself, not as a child, but as someone who had gradually shifted from background noise into something sharper, more aware. I noticed it first in the pauses, the way conversations lingered longer than they needed to, the way his eyes stayed a second too long before looking away. I told myself I was imagining it. I had no reason to think otherwise. The moment everything tilted wasn't dramatic. No music, no sudden confession. Just a quiet afternoon when the house felt too empty. My husband was away, unreachable, and I was alone with my thoughts. He came by for a simple reason, something harmless, or so it seemed. We talked. We always talked. About life, about choices, about how things don't always turn out the way you expect. There was a familiarity there that felt safe, almost comforting. That was the danger. Comfort lowers your guard. Then he said it. Not abruptly, not recklessly. He framed it like a question that had been living inside him for too long. A wish, he called it, though the word felt heavier than that. He didn't touch me. He didn't raise his voice. He just spoke honestly, telling me how he had felt for a long time. How he knew it was wrong. How he didn't expect anything. How he just needed me to know. Each sentence sounded careful, but together they formed something undeniable. That I should have stopped him. I should have reminded him of boundaries, of loyalty, of the lines that keep lives from unraveling. Instead, I listened. That was my first mistake. Listening turned into understanding, and understanding into something far more dangerous. He wasn't asking for a future. He wasn't promising anything. That somehow made it worse. There was no illusion to hide behind, no romance to soften the truth. Just desire, raw and unpolished, laid bare in front of me. What surprised me wasn't his confession. It was my reaction. I didn't feel offended or shocked. I felt seen. That realization scared me more than anything he had said. Somewhere along the way, I had forgotten what it felt like to be wanted without obligation. My marriage wasn't unhappy, but it had grown predictable. Desire had been replaced with routine, passion with familiarity. I hadn't known how much I missed that until it was suddenly placed in my hands. That I told him nothing at first. Silence stretched between us, thick and loaded. I could hear my own breathing, feel my heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. Every sensible part of me screamed to shut it down, to send him away, to protect what I had built. But another part of me, quieter but persistent, wondered what it would mean to say yes just once in my life without thinking of consequences. When I finally spoke, my voice didn't sound like my own. I told him I needed time. That I wasn't agreeing to anything. That this couldn't happen. Even as I said it, I knew how fragile those words were. He nodded, respectful, almost relieved that I hadn't rejected him outright. Before he left, he looked at me one last time, not with expectation but with acceptance. As if the choice was already mine. When the door closed behind him, the house felt different. Not empty anymore, but charged. I stood there for a long time, replaying every word, every look. I knew I was standing at the edge of something I couldn't undo. I also knew that pretending it hadn't affected me would be a lie. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just his wish anymore. It was a temptation I had already begun to carry. I didn't sleep that night. My phone stayed face down on the table, but every vibration, real or imagined, made my heart jump. I kept replaying her expression, the calm in her voice, the way she spoke like someone who had already made peace with an uncomfortable truth. By morning, I told myself it was over, that nothing had actually happened, that adults could acknowledge tension without acting on it. That lie barely lasted until the message came. She was the one who reached out, not him. A simple text, polite and disarming, saying she hoped I'd made it home safely and asking if I wanted to talk. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. I should have ignored it. I knew that. But curiosity has a way of disguising itself as closure. I agreed to meet, telling myself it would be for clarity, for boundaries, for an ending. We met in public, somewhere neutral where nothing inappropriate could happen. She spoke first, thanking me for coming, acknowledging the awkwardness without dramatizing it. She didn't blame me. That surprised me more than anything. Instead, she talked about her marriage like someone explaining a slow leak. No explosion, just years of pressure and quiet disappointment. She admitted she had noticed how he changed around me, how conversations felt different when my name came up. Hearing it out loud made it impossible to pretend I hadn't noticed too. Then she said something that shifted everything. She said she wasn't there to compete or accuse. She wanted honesty, even if it was uncomfortable. She asked me directly if I felt something for him. My instinct was to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. Silence answered for me. She nodded like she'd expected that response all along. What I didn't expect was her own confession. She admitted she was tired of pretending to be unaffected, tired of suppressing her own needs just to keep peace. She said watching the connection between us had forced her to confront feelings she had buried. About herself, about desire, about what she had been missing. The conversation wasn't confrontational. It was intimate in a way I hadn't experienced before. Stripped of pretense, days passed, and messages followed. Sometimes from him, hesitant and conflicted. Sometimes from her, thoughtful and surprisingly open. I told myself it was still just talking, still harmless. But the emotional pull grew stronger, and the lines blurred quietly, without a dramatic moment to mark their crossing. Every message felt like a small betrayal, not just of vows, but of the version of myself I believed in. When we finally met again, all three of us, it wasn't planned as some defining moment. Just happened. Conversation flowed easily at first, then slowed, thick with unspoken tension. No one pretended anymore. She acknowledged it openly, saying avoidance had already done enough damage. There was a strange sense of permission in the air, not spoken outright, but felt that I remember realizing then that the danger wasn't impulse, it was consent. Not the legal kind, but the emotional one. The kind that tells you everyone sees what's happening, and no one is stopping it. That realization scared me more than secrecy ever could. Because once everyone knows, there's no easy way back. And I understood with a sinking certainty that whatever choice I made next would carry consequences I wouldn't be able to talk my way out of later. After that night, I tried to create distance. I answered less, avoided eye contact, found excuses to stay busy whenever we visited. I told myself that ignoring the discomfort would make it disappear. But the harder I pulled away, the more aware I became of how deeply his words had settled inside me. They echoed in quiet moments, especially when my husband was absent, lost in his routines and exhaustion. His father never chased me openly. That was the part that confused me the most. He remained respectful in front of everyone, careful with his tone, controlled with his presence. But when we were alone, even briefly, there was an intensity in his attention that felt deliberate. He spoke to me as if we shared a private understanding, as if something had already been acknowledged without being named. He started framing his concern as worry for my happiness. He spoke about marriage, about how love changes, about how some people learn to endure instead of live. I listened more than I should have. I didn't encourage him, but I didn't stop him either. Somewhere along the way, silence became permission. What frightened me most was how easy it felt to talk to him. I found myself opening up about things I had never said out loud. How lonely I felt, how unseen, how tired of pretending everything was fine. He never criticized his son directly, but he made comparisons that didn't need to be spoken fully. He made me feel understood, and that understanding slowly began to matter more than my fear. I fought it internally every day. I reminded myself who he was, what he represented, how wrong it all was. I told myself attraction was just a thought, not an action. But thoughts have weight, and mine were starting to pull me in directions I didn't recognize. I began noticing his presence before he spoke. I became aware of the way his voice affected me. That realization filled me with shame. Then one afternoon he said it plainly. Not crudely. Not aggressively. He said he felt something he had no right to feel but felt it anyway. He said he had tried to ignore it, but pretending hadn't changed the truth. I remember my hands trembling, my breath shallow, my mind racing for the right response. I wanted to leave, to shut it down completely. Instead, I stayed still. I told him it was wrong. I told him it could never happen. He didn't argue. He only said that feelings don't disappear just because we wish them away. That response unsettled me more than pressure ever could. There was no force, no demand, just certainty. After that, everything changed inside me. I started measuring my days by moments of avoidance and moments of weakness. I felt guilty even when nothing happened. I felt disloyal simply for thinking. I looked at my husband and wondered when I had stopped wanting to tell him everything. What scared me most wasn't his desire. It was my hesitation. The pause before saying no. The way I replayed his words when I was alone. I realized that the line I believed was unbreakable had already begun to blur. And once that happened, I knew I was standing far closer to a choice than I was willing to admit. What finally ended it wasn't a fight or a secret being exposed. It was exhaustion. Emotional, mental, the kind that settles into your bones when you've been carrying too much truth for too long. The tension that once felt intense and meaningful started to feel heavy. Like every interaction came with an invisible cost. We were all quieter. Conversations paused more often. The honesty we thought would save us began to demand answers none of us were ready to give. She was the first to say it out loud. Not dramatically, not with tears, but with a tired clarity that made it impossible to argue. She said she couldn't keep standing in the middle of something that was slowly erasing her sense of self. She admitted that openness hadn't brought relief the way she hoped it would. Instead, it had forced her to watch emotions shift in real time, to feel replaced without being left, which somehow hurt more. Hearing that was like being confronted with damage I could no longer justify as mutual choice. He didn't argue either. He looked defeated, not angry, not relieved, just aware. He said he had been confusing honesty with courage, and that avoiding a decision had been a decision in itself. For the first time I saw the weight of what he was risking, not just his marriage but his integrity. That was the moment something in me finally settled. Not with satisfaction, not with heartbreak, but with acceptance. I stepped back. Not because I was asked to, but because I understood that staying would mean continuing to take something that didn't truly belong to me. I told them both that whatever connection existed between us had already served its purpose by revealing what was broken. Prolonging it wouldn't fix anything. It would only deepen the wounds. Saying those words hurt more than I expected. Letting go of something intense, even when it's wrong, still feels like loss. We didn't stay in contact after that. Not out of bitterness, but out of necessity. Healing required distance. I spent a long time replaying everything, wondering where responsibility truly lay, questioning whether I had been brave or selfish, honest or reckless. The truth sat somewhere uncomfortable in between. I wasn't a villain, but I wasn't innocent either. I had stepped into a space I knew was fragile and underestimated the impact of my presence. What stayed with me most wasn't the desire or the tension. It was the aftermath. The quiet recalibration of values. The realization that emotional infidelity doesn't need secrecy to be destructive. That sometimes transparency doesn't prevent pain. It just changes how it arrives. I learned that being seen isn't the same as being right, and that feeling understood doesn't absolve you of consequences. I don't regret acknowledging what was real. I do regret how easily I convinced myself that awareness made it harmless. It didn't. Changed people. Changed me. I became more careful with proximity, with vulnerability, with the stories I tell myself to excuse crossing lines. Some experiences don't end with closure, just understanding. This one ended quietly. No dramatic fallout, no public unraveling. Just 3 people walking away carrying different versions of the same truth. And even now, when I think back, what surprises me most isn't that it happened, but how believable it all felt while it was happening, and how clear everything became only after it was over.